The room is quiet, but not peaceful. There's a difference between silence and stillness. One numbs, the other stirs. Somewhere, a faucet drips. A clock ticks louder than it should, and a man sits alone, facing a broken mirror. He doesn't move, because if he does, he might feel something. We don't fear the noise outside. We fear the voice that awakens when everything else stops. That voice that asks, "What happened to you? You didn't plan to fade, but slowly you did." One small excuse at a time, one ignored instinct, one moment where you swallowed your truth for the sake of keeping peace with others, never with yourself. And now you feel it, not loudly, not in a scream, but in the way your chest tightens for no reason, in the way your energy drains before the day even begins. Something inside you stopped answering because it got tired of being unheard. That's the kind of silence this video begins in, not the peaceful kind, the kind that echoes. There's no music here, no fast cuts, no dopamine bait, only a mirror and a voice that refuses to flatter you. Maybe you didn't come here for motivation. Maybe you came here because you're tired of pretending you're okay, tired of being resilient when no one sees the cost, tired of reacting, explaining, surviving. That's good, because this isn't for the comfortable. It's not for the ones still looking for shortcuts or applause. This is for the ones who are ready to walk into the cold, who are ready to stop running from their own presence. What you're about to hear won't sound like advice. It'll sound like memory, like something you already knew, but were too distracted to confront. The Stoics believed in alignment with nature, not the nature of trees and stars, but the nature within, the unshakable, the precise, the silent. They didn't live loud lives. They didn't preach. They didn't wait for the world to understand them. They simply acted, consistently, unapologetically, internally aligned. That's why they were free while surrounded by chains, peaceful while surrounded by chaos, powerful without needing to prove it. You've forgotten how strong you become when you stop seeking noise to fill the void, when you stop negotiating your values for convenience. Today you remember, but this is not a lecture. There will be no steps, no numbered lists, only truths. Hard, uncomfortable, necessary. Each one will land like a whisper that hits too deep. Because you already know them. You've just been avoiding them, and maybe that's why you're still stuck. This is the video you don't pause, the one you don't multitask, the one you either feel or ignore completely, because what's coming isn't for everyone. It's for those who are done hiding, done chasing, done bending. If that's you, let's begin. Not with answers, but with a mirror. Look closely and don't look away. He sits in the dark, not because the lights are off, but because something inside him dimmed. The mirror is cracked, but that's not what hurts. What hurts is that the cracks finally reflect who he became. You don't notice it at first. The slow decay, the quiet erosion of standards you once swore by. It starts with a skipped morning, a silent yes when you wanted to scream no, a smile that hides your retreat. You begin negotiating with yourself, convincing your instincts to shut up, rewarding yourself for surviving, even if you've stopped living. That's the first layer of silent pain, the one that doesn't scream, but rearranges you from within. You tell yourself, it's just a phase, it's just temporary, but weeks become months. And you wake up unsure of who's really waking up with you. You check your phone before you check your soul. You scroll more than you think. You say, "I'm fine," more than you pray. And eventually, you stop trusting your own reflection. There's a reason this part of life feels unbearable. It's because your soul remembers who you used to be, and it's knocking, asking if you're still in there. But most people don't answer. They drown the knocking with noise, with podcasts, with plans, with people who clap while you crumble. You've been told to love yourself, But not once were you shown what self-respect looks like when no one is watching. It looks like discipline without applause. It looks like walking away without explanation. It looks like silence, the kind that burns away all your excuses, and that is where everything begins. The Stoics knew this. They didn't seek comfort. They sought clarity, because clarity, when pursued honestly, hurts. It exposes your masks. It reveals your weak spots. It makes you realize how much of your suffering is self-authored. They didn't shout about their values. They lived them, quietly, unshakably. That's what makes the silence unbearable at first. You've been lying to yourself too long. And truth has a violent kindness. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't flatter. It just waits. And when you're ready, it confronts you with everything you pretended not to see. That's where we are now, right here, in this discomfort. And you have a choice, one that no one can make for you. You can numb it, scroll past it, mute the voice that's finally speaking, or you can stay and listen, not to me, to the silence, because it remembers everything you buried. You were not born tired. You became tired from holding back what needed to be faced. The weight you carry isn't always made of tasks or people. Sometimes it's made of decisions postponed, truths avoided, boundaries unspoken. And that weight doesn't scream. It settles in your shoulders, in your breathing, in the way you talk about your life without really saying anything. There's a moment in every person's life where they feel the quiet shift. It doesn't come with drama, it comes in silence, like walking into your own room and not recognizing it anymore. You look around and everything's in place, but something is missing. You. Not the version you post online, not the one you present when asked how you're doing. The real one, the one who used to care, who used to try, who used to believe that discipline wasn't suffering, it was self-respect. And now, you call your decline burnout, you call your silence peace, but deep down, you know, you've been negotiating with weakness for too long. The Stoics had a word for this, apathema, not apathy, but the absence of internal chaos. They didn't chase happiness, they chased harmony, and harmony only comes when your actions match your values. That's the part we forget. You can't fake alignment. You can't lie to yourself and expect peace. You can't scroll through philosophy quotes and call it transformation. Change only happens when you stop asking for it to feel good. You think you're stuck because life is hard, but often you're stuck because you've made comfort your compass. You avoid hard conversations. You postpone habits. You hide behind "I'm trying" when you haven't truly committed. And every time you do that, you betray a part of you that remembers who you could be. Look around. Most people are not alive. They're animated corpses, driven by routine, dopamine, and fear of judgment. They wake up to escape the day. They speak just enough to appear functional. They breathe, but never deeply. You don't want that. You never did. You just got tired. And in your exhaustion, you let things slide. You let your standards soften. You let your mind clutter. You let your silence become numbness instead of clarity. But here's the truth. You are still in there, beneath the noise. Beneath the layers of "I'm fine." You are not broken. You're just unpracticed. Unpracticed in facing yourself with brutal honesty. That's where the Stoic lives. In that confrontation. When you stop flinching. When you stop apologizing for needing solitude. When you stop explaining your hunger for meaning. This world won't hand you clarity. It will sell you distractions, approval, and endless tasks. But never clarity. Clarity is earned. In silence, in discomfort, in repetition. You want freedom. Stop negotiating with your lesser self. Start doing the thing you keep postponing. Start saying the no you've been avoiding. Start living like someone who remembers what matters. Because here's a truth no one wants to admit. Most of your suffering is chosen, not consciously, but repeatedly. And every time you justify it, you reinforce it. So let this be the moment you stop. Not loudly, not dramatically, but inwardly. With a decision that feels like steel inside your chest. No more explaining, no more waiting to feel ready, no more blaming timing, people, or fate. The mirror is still cracked, but you're not. You're just unfinished, and you can fix that, not by becoming someone else, but by returning to the one you lost along the way. There is a silence that suffocates and a silence that sets you free. You've lived in the first kind for too long, the kind that comes from swallowing your instincts, from not saying what needed to be said, from watching yourself shrink to fit a life that stopped fitting you. But the other silence, the liberating one, that only comes after the storm, after you finally stop pretending you don't feel the weight, after you sit in the middle of your own mess and decide not to run. That's what this moment is. Not a breakdown, a return to what you abandoned, your discipline, your direction, your dignity. The world teaches you to numb, to smile through it, to stay busy, to move on. But the Stoics, they didn't move on from themselves. They moved in, deeper, farther, past the noise, into the exact pain most people avoid. Because they knew something most of us forget. Pain is not the enemy. Confusion is. When you're in pain but clear, you grow. When you're comfortable but lost, you rot. And you've been rotting in small ways. Every day you avoid the truth. Every day you betray your word. Every time you let a thought stay unchallenged. The pain isn't punishment. It's a signal. And the signal is this. You've tolerated too much for too long. You've tolerated procrastination dressed as rest, disrespect dressed as kindness, weakness dressed as peace. But the soul knows. It always knows. It whispers at first, then it aches. Until one day you wake up and the ache is all you feel, not because life is cruel, but because you stopped being honest. So now, be honest. Admit what you know deep down, that you've drifted, that you've compromised, that the version of you who once felt powerful is fading, not because he's gone, but because you stopped showing up for him. That's what discipline is, not a punishment, not a grind, a return to order, to structure, to clarity. It's the quiet refusal to let your lesser self keep driving. The Stoics didn't need permission to be great. They didn't wait for the mood, the motivation, or the moment. They acted, even in exile, even in sickness, even in war. Because freedom is not the absence of struggle. It's the decision to live with intention, despite the struggle. You don't need more time. You need fewer excuses. You need fewer apologies for wanting more. You need fewer distractions dressed as rest. You need to simplify, to subtract. Remove the people who blur your mind, the habits that steal your momentum, the words you use to soften your own decline. Because deep down, you already know. The life you want costs the life you're currently living. And it's not about changing everything overnight. It's about choosing one hard thing and doing it without a speech, without validation, just one act of alignment, then another, until, slowly, you no longer flinch at your reflection. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. That's the work. That's the walk. That's the silence you've been craving. Not the silence of numbness, but the silence of power. Let's stop pretending. You already know what's wrong. You just haven't had the silence or the courage to admit it. The discomfort you feel, it's not life punishing you. It's your conscience trying to wake you up. Not everything needs a name. Not every feeling needs to be explained. Sometimes what you need is to stop running from it. The anxiety, the restlessness, the ache that follows you into bed and greets you in the morning. It's all the same message over and over again. You've abandoned the man you were meant to become, not by choice, but by neglect. And now life echoes your absence, in relationships that feel empty, in days that blur, in goals that no longer feel like yours. That's why today matters, Because if you keep ignoring this voice, you will forget how to hear it at all. You don't need a guru. You don't need another strategy. You need to stop lying to yourself about how much time you still have, about how you're almost ready, about how it's not the right season. The Stoics didn't wait for clarity. They moved through chaos with their spines straight. They didn't romanticize suffering. They made it useful. They didn't control the world. They controlled their response to it. And that control, that internal authority, that's what you've lost, because you've outsourced your direction to the algorithm, to the crowd, to the temporary. And with every scroll, every delay, every compromise, you become less of who you're supposed to be. But here's the hidden truth. No one sells you. Your life will not change because of what you know. It will change the moment you start honoring what you already know, in silence. Because real transformation is quiet. It doesn't beg to be seen. It doesn't announce itself. It just happens. In decisions no one witnesses. You don't need more ambition. You need alignment. Alignment between your words and your actions, between your pain and your behavior, between what you tolerate and what you truly believe. And that starts now, not with noise, but with awareness. This isn't motivation. This is a mirror, held long enough for you to see what you've been avoiding. Maybe the reason your life hasn't changed is because you've treated your inner work like a hobby, optional, occasional, conditional. But the Stoic life isn't occasional, it's total. It's not something you practice when you feel strong. It's something you return to when you feel weakest, because it's in the weakness, in the trembling, in the silence of your lowest moment, that your real standards are revealed. Not what you say in public, not what you post online, but what you do when no one claps, when no one is watching, when quitting would be easier. That is where the Stoic begins. Not in comfort, but in the fire. And the fire doesn't destroy you. It burns away everything you no longer need, your excuses, your indecision, your performative life. So if you're still here, still listening, still breathing in the weight of these words, then maybe, just maybe, you're ready. Not for answers, but for a deeper kind of question. Who would you be if you stopped breaking the promises you whisper to yourself? There's a moment when you finally see the pattern, not because someone points it out, but because the weight of your own repetition becomes unbearable. Same thoughts, same regrets, same cycle of next week, next month, when I have time. You keep moving, but not forward, just in circles. And that's the most dangerous kind of suffering, the one that feels like motion, but leads nowhere. The Stoics had no patience for that illusion. They believed in progress, not perfection, but real progress always leaves a mark, a cost, a sacrifice. You know the cost. You've just been delaying it, because comfort is addictive, even when it poisons you slowly. It's easy to stay in places that drain you, easier to keep company that distracts you, easier to wear a mask than to admit the man behind it feels lost. But masks get heavy, and with time, they don't just hide you, they replace you. So here's the choice you face now. Keep feeding the illusion, or break the cycle, not with a dramatic shift, not with a viral transformation, but with quiet rebellion. The kind that happens on a random Tuesday when you finally close the door, put your phone away, and do the thing you've postponed for months. That's where it begins. Not in the gym, not in the journal, but in the decision, the silent, burning decision. I will not live like this anymore. No one hears it, but you feel it. In your spine, in your chest, in the tension that slowly loosens once you choose yourself again. The Stoics weren't obsessed with results. They were obsessed with rhythm. Do it daily, do it precisely, do it without applause, because the discipline is the reward. You think you need motivation. You don't. You need 1 hour, of focus, of solitude, of uncomfortable honesty. That's how the fog lifts. Not all at once, but gradually. With every moment you choose reality over escape, truth over comfort, direction over drift. You want power? Then stop explaining. Silence is not weakness, it's command. Stop advertising your pain. Stop narrating your struggle. Just walk quietly forward. Let your consistency speak. Let your presence say what your mouth can't. Because in a world addicted to noise, silence becomes magnetic and discipline becomes divine. But only when it's rooted in something deeper than punishment. Respect. Self-respect doesn't need mirrors. It doesn't need compliments. It doesn't even need results. It needs you. At 5 a.m., at 10 p.m., in the moment between impulse and action, choosing the harder path. Because you remember what the easy path cost you. You're not here to survive. You're here to sharpen, to strip away everything that made you forget how capable you are. Not just for others, but for you. This isn't about goals anymore. This is about returning to your core, to that version of you that existed before the noise, before the masks, before the constant justification of your slow decay. And once you meet him again, don't let him go. Protect him with silence, with discipline, with a refusal to ever betray him again. Because when your actions honor your essence, you don't need to speak. The world adjusts. There's a quiet kind of regret that doesn't cry, doesn't rage, doesn't even speak. It just lingers. In the small gaps of your day, when you're waiting in line, when the music stops, when the room falls silent and there's no one left to distract you from yourself. That's when it arrives. The whisper, you were meant for more than this. But what did you do with that voice? You ignored it. You called it unrealistic. You buried it beneath schedules, screens, and other people's opinions. And little by little, it stopped visiting. That's how men fade, not by failing, but by forgetting what made them alive. You once had clarity, not complete, not perfect, but enough. Enough to feel, enough to build, enough to rise at dawn with something to prove, not to the world, but to yourself. Now you move from task to task like a machine with no map, reactive, overstimulated, disconnected. You've read the books, listened to the podcasts, saved the quotes, but nothing changes because your actions still serve the same God, comfort, and comfort doesn't demand truth, it just demands compliance. That's why discipline feels violent at first, because it threatens the fragile peace you built on avoidance. But peace without direction is just sedation. The Stoics knew this. They didn't seek stillness for its own sake. They sought clarity. Clarity that cuts, clarity that organizes, clarity that tells you, without apology, this is what must be done. And you don't have to like it. You just have to obey it. Obedience. Not to someone else, to your higher self. The version of you that doesn't need likes, praise, or certainty. He just needs your consistency, even when it's boring, even when it's painful, especially then. Because that's where trust is forged, not in inspiration, but in repetition. Trust in yourself isn't built by feeling good. It's built by doing what's right, especially when no one sees it. And the more you do that, the more your silence becomes power. Not passive silence. Commanding silence, the kind that walks into a room and doesn't need to prove anything, the kind that others feel, without knowing why. That's the Stoic path, not flashy, not loud, but undeniable. You don't need to yell that you've changed, you need to live in a way that makes others question how they've been living. And that starts with the decision to stop negotiating with your weakness, with your past, with the fear that says, maybe I'm not built for this. You are, but only if you stop waiting to feel ready. Readiness is a myth. You act or you rot. There is no middle ground. So today, you act Quietly, relentlessly, you get up when it's dark, you train when it's cold. You focus when no one's watching, not to impress, not to punish, but to reclaim something sacred, your inner standard, the one the world didn't give you, the one no one can take. So hold it, protect it, live by it, because once you do, everything else begins to align. 1. What you tolerate transforms you. Not all transformation is growth. Sometimes it's erosion of standards, of voice, of self. Every time you let it slide, the delay, the disrespect, the compromise, you teach the world how to treat you. More importantly, you teach yourself what's acceptable. And slowly, without knowing it, you become someone else. Someone more silent, more tired, more disconnected. Tolerance sounds noble, but without discernment, it becomes surrender. A Stoic doesn't fight everything, but he doesn't absorb everything either. He chooses, with precision, with backbone, because he knows what you allow becomes your life, and some things are not worth carrying, not because they're heavy, but because they're corrupting. So ask yourself, what have you been tolerating that's been shaping you into someone you no longer recognize? 2. The one who controls silence controls power. You were taught that silence is weakness, that you must defend yourself, explain, justify, but the Stoic knows the more you explain, the less you're believed. The more you speak, the more you dilute your presence. Silence, when chosen, becomes dominance. It is the refusal to engage in noise, the ability to observe chaos without becoming it. When others provoke, the Stoic pauses, not out of fear but out of control, and that pause creates power. Power to choose, to act with clarity, to remain unmoved by impulse, so the next time the world begs you to react, don't. Let your stillness become the loudest thing in the room. 3. Your routine is your disguised destiny. We wait for life to change while repeating the same 24 hours. But fate isn't found in the grand gestures. It's hidden in the mundane, in how you wake, how you eat, how you train, how you speak to yourself when you fail. You don't rise by chance, you rise by rhythm. The Stoic doesn't trust motivation, he trusts structure, because he knows emotion fades. But systems carry truth. So if your life feels chaotic, don't chase goals. Audit your days. Because they are not neutral, they are architects of your character. 4. What you avoid commands you. Every unspoken truth becomes a leash. Every fear you sidestep becomes a cage. Avoidance doesn't erase, it amplifies. The Stoic doesn't chase fear, but he doesn't flinch when it arrives. He sees it for what it is, a teacher, a messenger, a compass, and he walks toward it, not recklessly but willingly, because what you face frees you, what you avoid owns you. So ask yourself, what still has power over you simply because you won't look at it? 5. Emotions are not enemies. They are raw messages. We're told to suppress, to numb, to stay strong. But strength is not repression, it's understanding. The Stoic doesn't ignore his emotions, he studies them, interprets them, commands them. Anger is not weakness, it's a signal. Sadness is not failure, it's reflection. But only when you step back and observe, not react, you feel deeply good. But now, feel responsibly, because emotional clarity is power disguised as stillness. 6. Your presence changes when your mind quiets. There's something sacred about a person who doesn't need to prove anything. You feel it. You don't know why, but you sense the difference. They don't interrupt. They don't chase attention. They move like they already know who they are and don't need permission to be it. That's what happens when the mind becomes still, not empty, but ordered. The Stoic doesn't silence the noise around him. He silences the chaos within, and from that stillness he gains presence, the kind that doesn't demand space. It creates it. So if you want to be felt, don't raise your voice. Raise your standards, silently. 7. If you want peace, build discipline. Peace isn't found in candles and mantras. It's found in sweat, in early mornings, in actions that align with your values, even when you don't feel like it. Peace is not the absence of chaos. It's the ability to remain intact in the middle of it. And that ability, it's earned. You don't meditate your way into strength. You behave your way into it. Discipline is not a prison. It's a path, a proof to yourself that you can be trusted even when no one's watching. So if you crave peace, start with your calendar. Start with your habits. Start with the way you treat your future self today. 8. You only suffer for what you cling to. Pain is not optional, but prolonged suffering often is. The tighter you grip, the more it controls you. Ideas, people, titles, outcomes. You think letting go is loss, but clinging, that's where you decay. The Stoic releases, not because he doesn't care, but because he understands that nothing belongs to him. Not praise, not possessions, not even the body. And in that detachment, he becomes unbreakable. Letting go isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Because freedom doesn't come from holding on, it comes from knowing what to release. 9. Acceptance is not surrender. We mistake realism for defeat. We confuse surrender with clarity. But the Stoic accepts because he sees. He accepts reality, not because he's given up, but because he refuses to argue with what is. That's not passivity, that's strategy. You act where you have power. You release where you don't. That's not giving up, it's growing up. Acceptance doesn't mean you stop moving. It means you stop wasting energy resisting the wind and start adjusting your sail. 10. Revenge is weakness dressed as justice. You think striking back gives you control, but it does the opposite. It ties your emotional state to someone else's mistake. It makes you reactive when you were born to be deliberate. The Stoic does not carry the fire others throw at him. He lets it drop. He keeps walking. Not because he's weak, but because he refuses to let another's chaos enter his spirit. Revenge is loud. Peace is louder because it doesn't need noise to prove its power. Walk away, not because they deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve freedom. 11. Whoever controls your reaction controls your reality. It's not the event, it's your response. That's where your life is shaped, not by what happens, but by how much power you give it. Every time you snap, someone else wins. Every time you explain yourself to be understood, you trade peace for validation. The Stoic doesn't react. He observes, he filters, he chooses, because power is in restraint. You think control is about dominance, but true control is quiet. It's not needing the last word. It's not flinching at disrespect. It's realizing, you don't control me unless I let you. That's where real strength lives, in the space between the trigger and the choice not to pull it. 12. The world won't respect you, but you can. You've waited for recognition, for applause, for someone to tell you you're doing well. But the truth is, the world is busy, distracted, self-absorbed. Respect is rare, and when it comes, it often arrives too late. So what do? You give it to yourself, not with ego, with integrity. You live in a way that makes you proud to be alone with your own thoughts. You stop negotiating your standards in the name of fitting in. You stop lowering your voice so others feel tall. You stop chasing proximity to people who don't know how to carry you. The Stoic doesn't beg for space. He creates it through presence, through principle, through silence. And in that silence, he becomes undeniable. Your life doesn't need to be impressive. It needs to be congruent, aligned, disciplined, anchored, not to the world, but to your own code. You don't rise by chance. You rise by decision, repeated daily, lived without applause. And one day, you'll look in the mirror, not for validation, but for confirmation. You kept your word to yourself. That's what respect looks like. Not loud, not public, but permanent. You've now heard the 12. Not commandments, not tips, but reminders of who you were before you got lost, of who you become when you stop running, of the quiet man inside you who never left. He's been waiting, patient, persistent, unwilling to die without being remembered. You don't owe anyone your transformation, but you owe it to him, to the part of you that still believes there's more, not more comfort, more clarity, more alignment, more life. And now you know the path, not glamorous, not instant, but true. So take it and walk it like a Stoic. The mirror is still there. It didn't move, didn't blink, didn't argue. It just waited. Waited for the moment you'd finally stop filling the room with noise and face the silence you've been avoiding. Not the silence outside, the one within, the kind that doesn't comfort, the kind that stings. Because in that stillness, you remember what you lost. Not people, not status, not time. You lost yourself. And not in one moment, in many, in the little lies. The quiet postponements, the subtle betrayals of who you knew you were meant to be. You thought you could outrun it, work harder, distract better, smile more convincingly, but clarity doesn't care about your performance. It waits for the show to end. And now, the curtain's dropped. It's just you, and the reflection, and the questions you never wanted to ask. Why did I stop? When did I start settling? Who am I? When there's no one left to impress. The Stoics knew this space. They didn't fear it. They lived in it, because that's where the soul breathes again. Not when life is perfect, but when truth is allowed back into the room. You keep chasing freedom, but freedom isn't found in achievement. It's found in alignment. When your thoughts, words, and actions no longer contradict each other, when your mornings match your intentions, when your habits echo your values, that's peace, not soft, not passive, but earned. And you earn it by returning to discipline, to direction, to the voice you silenced when the world got too loud. It never hated you for walking away. It just waited, quietly, fiercely, because it knew you'd eventually get tired of performing. You don't need to start over. You need to remember who you were before fear took the wheel, before approval became your compass, before you traded depth for acceptance. That version of you isn't gone. He's buried under layers of pretending, and every silent act of self-respect digs him back up. One repetition at a time, one refusal at a time, one promise kept without witness, without applause. That's how the Stoic walks, not with noise, not with force, with stillness that shakes the room. You don't need to prove, you need to proceed, without asking for permission, without needing to be understood. You know now what matters, what was missing, what was always within reach, if you were just willing to strip the rest away. And maybe the world will stay chaotic, noisy, distracting. But now you carry the one thing they can't touch, your own standard. So walk, with fewer words, with fewer attachments, with fewer apologies, because the man who honors his silence cannot be owned. You made it here, through every word, through every truth that stung but didn't lie, through every mirror held up to you, not to shame you, but to remind you that silence is sacred, that stillness is strength, that presence is earned. You didn't listen to a video. You walked through yourself. You passed by the excuses. You faced the things you didn't name. You stood still while most keep running. And now you know, not everything needs noise. Not every change needs permission. Not every truth needs to be posted. Some things are too real to be shared casually, so don't. Don't try to explain what you felt here. Don't try to summarize this shift. Just let it live inside you. Let it echo in the quiet moments, in the choices no one sees, in the way you get up tomorrow, not louder but clearer, because now you carry something rare, something unspoken, something built in the dark. You carry direction, and people will feel it, even if they can't name it. Your posture will change, your words will shrink, your focus will sharpen, and some won't understand. That's fine. You're not here to be understood. You're here to become undeniable. You've done enough explaining, enough apologizing, enough shrinking. Now, you execute, quietly, consistently, without asking for applause. That's the Stoic way. So if this video cut deeper than most, if it found you in the noise, if it reminded you of something you buried, leave a dot, 1, in the comments. No explanation, no confession, just a dot. Because sometimes that's all it takes to signal that you're awake, that you're done negotiating, done performing, done living at half your capacity. A dot. That says, I'm still here. I remember. I'm ready. And if you know someone, even one, who's been moving in silence, who's been carrying the weight without words, who's been aching for alignment, send this, quietly, like a whisper between warriors. No pressure, no taglines, no pitch, just silence, shared with someone who might finally be ready to hear it, because those who get it don't need it explained, and those who don't aren't ready yet. Let them scroll, let them laugh, let them wait. You walk, with less noise, with more clarity, with a memory of what you just reignited in yourself, because something moved here, and you felt it. Don't betray that. Let it grow, let it sharpen, let it command you toward the man you forgot you could be. He's watching, not from outside, but from within. And now that you've met him again, don't let him go. Maybe you didn't expect this. Not a video, not a lecture, but a mirror, with no one to interrupt your reflection. And now that the noise has faded, now that every surface has cracked wide enough for the truth to seep in, you're faced with something you can't unsee. Your patterns, your decay, your potential, still breathing beneath it all. This wasn't about information. It was about remembrance. Remembering what it feels like to sit in the weight of your own story and not look away. That's the part no one teaches. How to stay. How to hold still when the truth begins to sting. How to rebuild without telling the world you're doing it. Because the Stoic doesn't announce his healing. He doesn't decorate his discipline. He just walks, in silence, in shadow, in alignment. And slowly the world begins to adjust. Not because you told it to, but because you stopped trying to control it. So if this message hit something real, don't package it. Don't force it into words. Don't dilute it for others who still aren't ready to feel. Let it live inside you like a vow, unspoken, unshakable, unwilling to be forgotten again. You've made enough promises to the world. Try making one to yourself, a silent one, that no one sees, that no one tracks, the kind that builds momentum not through volume, but through repetition. Start now. Without waiting for the next motivation, without over-explaining, choose one thing to carry out today. Not perfectly, but precisely. You don't need fireworks, you need rhythm. The Stoic path doesn't begin in power, it begins in fatigue. When you're tired of pretending, tired of quitting, tired of your own excuses sounding clever, that's when it starts. And it starts quietly, at 4 a.m., at the gym, in front of the journal, while washing the dishes with attention. That's the part no one wants to hear, that greatness looks ordinary to the untrained eye. But you'll know, because this time you won't be chasing feelings. You'll be chasing alignment. That sacred moment where what you say, what you think, and what you do finally stop contradicting each other. And when you feel that, don't ruin it by talking, just keep going. The way forward is silent, but it is not empty. It's full of your own return. So if you're still here, if something in you won't let this message fade, let it anchor you. And if you feel like giving something back, don't flatter this video. Honor it with action. Close this tab, shut off the noise, and move. But if you must leave a mark, make it subtle, one dot, one word, one line of respect. Not for me, for you. Because when you honor what moved you, you multiply it. And when you guard it, you grow it. The ones who understand will feel it. The rest are still waking up. Let them. You have your direction now. Walk. You've heard enough voices, you've followed enough noise, you've tried enough systems built for people who never knew your soul, and still, you're here. Which means something in you refuses to go numb. Something in you is still reaching, not for attention, but for alignment. That's what this has always been about. Not fixing, not perfecting, but remembering. And now that you remember, don't go back to sleep. Don't let the algorithms seduce you again. Don't let the old habits bargain for your return. Don't let the world distract you with goals that were never yours to begin with. Just walk. Walk away from the echo chamber, from the soft prison of other people's expectations, from the identity you outgrew but never buried. Walk into repetition, into rhythm, into the silence that used to scare you, but now feels like home. Because in that silence, you meet yourself again, and he's not loud, he doesn't cheer, he doesn't need validation, he just watches, patient, still, waiting to see if this time you'll stay, because he's seen you rise before and fall back into comfort. He's seen your promises and your patterns. But this time feels different. Not because it's louder, because it's quieter, because you're not trying to convince anyone. You're just ready to build, brick by brick, step by step, in a direction no one else needs to understand. And if they ask where you've gone, don't explain. Point to the discipline, to the results, to the shift in your posture. They'll feel it, even if they never say it out loud. Because energy doesn't need announcements. It introduces itself. You are now becoming someone whose energy speaks before words do. That's rare, that's sacred, so protect it. With boundaries, with focus, with solitude that nourishes, not isolates. Don't waste this clarity, don't rush to share it. Let it sink deeper, let it solidify through action. And if you do speak, make it mean something. Say only what you've lived. Say only what leaves silence afterward. Say only what you'd be willing to stand behind, even if no one clapped. That's stoic. That's sacred. That's you remembered. So here we end the words, not the journey, not the discipline, not the fire, only the voice. Because now you don't need to be told what to do next. You already know. You've already seen the cost of delay. You've already paid the price of comfort. You've already tested what happens when you choose nothing. So now choose. Deliberately, daily, devoutly, and trust that the man who builds in silence will not go unnoticed forever. Because even if the world stays blind, your soul won't. There comes a moment when silence becomes a boundary, not between you and others, but between who you were and who you refuse to be again. It doesn't look heroic. It doesn't come with fanfare. It happens on an ordinary day when you finally stop reaching for what doesn't reach back. The world will call it cold, but it's not. It's clarity. Clarity that whispers, you've been trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you, and suddenly you stop explaining. You stop chasing conversations that never end. You stop watering connections that only drain you. That's not bitterness. That's alignment. Because energy is not infinite, and every time you pour it into someone who doesn't value it, you abandon a part of yourself that needed that same care. The Stoic doesn't broadcast this shift. He doesn't announce he's pulling back, he just moves inward, not in retreat but in reverence. Reverence for his own time, his own space, his own path. And slowly, a new rhythm emerges. You stop responding out of obligation. You stop over-explaining. You stop shrinking so others feel tall. You start standing quietly, but unmistakably. And that silence, it doesn't isolate you. It protects you, because not everyone deserves access to the version of you who has finally begun to heal. You spent too long trying to fix people who benefited from your brokenness, too long translating your soul to those who never planned to listen, too long asking for respect in rooms built on noise. Now, you build different rooms, rooms where silence is sacred, where effort is mutual, where peace is the baseline, not the prize. That's the Stoic life. Not louder, cleaner, filtered, focused. And it starts with one sacred decision: to protect your frequency, even if it means standing alone. You don't need everyone to get it. You need the discipline to keep walking when no one claps. You need the discernment to know that peace isn't found in being liked, but in being whole. That's the war no one talks about. The battle between your need to belong and your need to be free. Choose freedom, because anything that costs you your peace is too expensive. And if they ask why you changed, you won't need to say a word. They'll feel it, in your absence, in your boundaries, in your new refusal to bleed for what no longer feeds you. That's the kind of silence that speaks, not the one that avoids, the one that declares. It says, "I'm done explaining myself to noise. I'm done postponing my healing to maintain illusions. I'm done betraying the man I'm becoming just to keep the peace with who I used to be." And once that clicks, you don't go back. You don't water dead plants. You don't rehearse pain for pity. You don't chase clarity from people who live in fog. You walk straight, steady, still, not for distance, for direction. Because every step now is sacred, every decision is cleaner, every interaction is filtered through this one truth: I am no longer available for what drains me. There's a cost to staying available to everything. Every open door becomes an open wound. Every unchecked notification becomes a diluted focus. Every yes you give to what doesn't align is a silent no to the version of you you're trying to become. But no one tells you that, because boundaries don't look noble. They look distant, they look cold, they look like you're pulling away from the world. But maybe that's the point. Maybe pulling away is the only way to pull yourself back. Because the man you were meant to be doesn't live in constant reaction. He doesn't chase closure from chaos. He doesn't explain his vision to noise. He doesn't apologize for choosing solitude over superficial connection. That man lives beneath the debris. The debris of overcommitment, of forced conversations, of spaces where your presence is required but never received. And to uncover him, you'll have to offend a few illusions. You'll have to disappoint people who loved your silence only when it benefited them. You'll have to face the truth that many relationships survived not because of honesty, but because of your compliance. And when you finally choose integrity over comfort, you will be labeled as distant, as different, as difficult. Let them, because what they call distance, you'll call clarity. What they call different, you'll call evolved. And what they call difficult is simply you no longer being easy to exploit. That's not selfish, that's sacred. You are not a resource, you are not a reaction. You are not a soft place for others to dump their chaos and walk away lighter. You are a standard. And that standard starts with how you treat yourself when no one is watching. So begin there. Audit your own mind. Not just your calendar, not just your diet. Audit the thoughts you let rent space without cost. Audit the beliefs that enter without being questioned. Audit the way you speak to yourself when things go wrong. The Stoic understands the real battle isn't outside, it's between your ears. You'll lose years trying to fix external chaos when the storm lives inside your internal habits. That's why discipline matters, not to look good, not to win approval, but to remain unshaken when the noise comes. Because it will come. Chaos always returns to test your stillness, but stillness is not passive. It's presence with posture. It's the ability to move without rushing, to act without reacting, to speak only when speech becomes necessary. And when you start living like that, people won't know what to do with you. You won't respond the way they expect. You won't chase closure. You won't collapse into self-doubt when misunderstood. You'll hold your line, even when it's quiet, even when it's lonely, even when it feels like the old you would have said yes, because silence is now your sword, not to wound, but to cut through noise, to carve direction, to protect what you're building, even when no one sees it, especially then. You've made it this far, not because life got easier, but because something in you got tired of pretending, tired of making yourself small so others feel big, tired of swallowing your fire to keep the peace, tired of handing out access to people who never earned your presence. That's not anger, that's awakening, and once it happens, you can't unsee what you now know. You see the wasted hours, the diluted energy, the choices made out of fear, not alignment. You see how often you said yes just to avoid the discomfort of no. You see how you over-explained, over-apologized, over-gave, hoping someone would finally see you. But they didn't, because you were too busy hiding behind politeness. The Stoic path has no room for that. It is not cruel, but it is clear. It does not invite everyone in. It does not explain its movements. It does not seek approval from the very systems that thrive on your confusion. It simply acts, with direction, with restraint, with a sacred kind of detachment that says, I am not available for anything that pulls me off purpose. And that purpose, it's not grand, it's not glamorous. It's simple. Become a man you would respect, even if no one else ever noticed. That begins with silence. Silence that is not avoidance, but armor. Not isolation, but inner strength. Not indifference, but emotional sovereignty. Because the man who doesn't flinch has already made peace with discomfort. He's already felt the sting of rejection and stayed upright. He's already buried the old self and mourned it quietly. He's already walked away from what felt familiar, to protect what felt true. And that truth now sits inside you, not shouting but waiting to see if this time you'll honor it with action, because the voice in your head that tells you to wait, to stall, to seek approval, is not your intuition. It's your old identity, begging to survive. Don't feed it, don't negotiate with it, don't explain to it, let it go hungry, starve it with discipline, drown it in focus, replace its noise with structure. Wake up early, not because it's trendy, but because the man you respect rises before excuses. Train, not for aesthetics, but to remember what it feels like to choose discomfort over decay. Write, not for likes, but to clarify the storm inside you. Speak less, not to disappear, but to let your presence do the work your words used to fake. You are not here to be understood. You are here to be aligned, and alignment requires loss. The loss of comfort, of convenience, of who you thought you had to be accepted. But what you gain in return is unshakable, a posture that cannot be faked, a rhythm that cannot be borrowed, a respect that cannot be taken, because it's rooted in self. That is the Stoic way, not cold, just clean, not distant, just discerning, not empty, just full of things that matter. So now the choice returns, not as a question, but as a mirror. Are you willing to lose everything that isn't you so you can become who you were always meant to be? No applause, no announcement, just action. There's a moment when you realize you've been the one holding the door open for everything that keeps you stuck. Not fate, not luck, not bad timing. You, with every silent permission, with every boundary left unspoken, with every time you swallowed your instinct to keep a connection that was already broken. And the worst part, you did it in the name of being a good man, a loyal man, a forgiving man, but a man who abandons himself to keep others comfortable isn't good. He's disappearing, and now you feel it, not as rage, but as hollowness. That strange ache when you look around and wonder, why does everything feel heavier than it should? Because you've been carrying what wasn't yours, And the Stoic knows, clarity isn't about gaining more, it's about letting go of what never belonged. That includes roles you never chose, masks you wore for too long, expectations that were projected onto you before you even knew your own voice. So now you return, not to the world, to yourself. You unlearn, you subtract. You let silence do what words couldn't. You let go without speeches. You forgive without permission. You walk without being chased, because peace doesn't beg, it stands. And that's where your transformation begins. Not in becoming someone else, but in becoming unapologetically you. The one who stops explaining his solitude, the one who reclaims his mornings, the one who speaks less, listens more, and moves with the kind of presence that interrupts rooms. Not to impress, but because stillness has a gravity of its own, and now that you've tasted that stillness, you can't go back. You can't laugh at things that aren't funny. You can't sit in circles where truth is avoided. You can't trade your peace for proximity to people who don't value alignment. So you sit differently, you answer slower, you choose cleaner. And not everyone will understand. That's okay. The Stoic doesn't live for understanding. He lives in accordance with what's real. And sometimes that means walking away from friendships that became performances, from patterns that became cages, from versions of yourself that were built on survival. And it hurts, but not as much as staying. Because staying in a place that no longer sees you is its own kind of death, and you didn't come this far to die pretending. So now, you walk forward, quietly, but with fire. You leave behind the conversations that drain you. You turn down the invitations that pull you backwards. You stop justifying the parts of you that are no longer negotiable. Your time, your energy, your peace. These are sacred now, and sacred things are not offered casually. So yes, some people will notice the change. They'll say you're colder, more distant, harder to reach. But here's what they won't say: that you're lost, that you're unsure, that you're spinning in circles like you used to, because now you're still, now you're grounded, now you've chosen direction over distraction. And that choice has cost you. But it's also given you something rare, yourself, the version that doesn't need reminders, the one who shows up without applause, the one who no longer waits for permission to act in alignment. That's the man who leads, not with noise, but with presence, not with charm, but with consistency, not with declarations, but with discipline. Because while the world argues, he executes. While others doubt, he repeats. While most seek shortcuts, he sharpens the edge of his own spirit, and in doing so, he becomes someone that chaos cannot move, not because life gets easier, but because he got quieter. And that silence? It isn't absence, it's control. There's something different about a man who no longer explains himself, not because he has something to hide, but because he's done performing. He doesn't speak to fill the silence. He doesn't react to prove control. He doesn't try to be understood by those who haven't earned the right to hear his truth. He simply is. And in a world addicted to validation, that kind of presence feels like rebellion, because he's not playing the game. He's playing the long war against his old self, his former patterns, his weaker tendencies that used to call the shots. That war is never loud. It's fought in tiny, invisible moments, before dawn, after failure, in the pause between impulse and decision. And most will never see it. They'll see a man who's calm, focused, quiet, but they won't know the battles he wins just to stay that way, because every time he chooses stillness over reaction, he's dismantling years of conditioning. Every time he sits with discomfort instead of numbing it, he's rewriting the code of his past. Every time he walks away without needing to be right, he's sharpening a blade no one can see. That's the Stoic edge. It's not about being emotionless. It's about emotional precision, feeling fully but responding only when it serves alignment. And to do that, you have to get brutally honest about the patterns that still own you, the narratives that keep you small. The stories you tell yourself to justify delay. You say you're waiting for clarity, but sometimes the truth is, you're waiting for it to stop being uncomfortable. It won't. Growth isn't comfortable. Neither is clarity. Neither is freedom. All of it requires sacrifice of identity, of comfort, of everything that felt safe but kept you stuck. And here's the part most won't accept. You have to walk through the fire alone. No one's coming to push you. No one's going to see your potential and carry you there. It's on you. Every step, every choice, every moment of silence where quitting feels easier than recommitting. But if you stay long enough for the discomfort to become discipline, you emerge with something unbreakable. Conviction, not the kind you post about, the kind that burns behind your eyes, that shapes your tone, that anchors your walk, that says, without saying anything, I know who I am and I know where I'm going. And once you carry that, you become dangerous, not to others. To everything that once held you back, you no longer beg for time, you control it, you no longer fear rejection, you filter it, you no longer need the room, because you became the foundation it was built on. And while others chase applause, you chase precision. While they overcomplicate, you simplify. While they broadcast their plans, you disappear into action. Because real power doesn't advertise itself, it doesn't need to. And the ones who carry it don't ask for permission to live by their code. They build quietly, they endure consistently, they execute relentlessly, and one day, without announcement, without noise, without warning, they arrive. Not as a surprise, as a result. So when the world tries to pull you back, to distract you, to seduce you with ease, remember who you've become. A man no longer addicted to attention. A man no longer impressed by appearances. A man no longer confused about what matters. A man who carries silence like armor and moves like someone who already knows. Respect is not demanded. It is built, brick by invisible brick, in the dark, in the doubt, in the discipline no one sees. And once it's built, you don't need to raise your voice. Your presence will do the talking. You no longer chase peace. You embody it. Because you've realized peace was never about finding the right environment. It was about becoming the right vessel. You've walked through enough noise, enough confusion, enough chaos disguised as connection, and now you know peace is posture, not circumstance. It's how you breathe intention and still choose precision. It's how you show up even when the world doesn't clap. It's how you leave rooms without needing closure, and most won't understand that, because they're still addicted to the noise, addicted to explaining, to performing, to proving that they're okay. But you stopped proving. You stopped apologizing for choosing silence, for walking away without drama, for doing the inner work with no audience. You understand now, not everyone deserves access to your process. Not everyone earns a seat in your peace. You're done being the one who always makes room, the one who bends so others don't break, the one who explains his silence just to make others comfortable, because comfort isn't your compass anymore. Clarity is, and clarity doesn't beg. It doesn't justify, it doesn't flinch, it just moves. With precision, with conviction, with clean intent. That's who you are now. A man who doesn't need to announce his boundaries because they're felt. A man who doesn't need to debate his direction because it's lived. A man who no longer trades his alignment for approval. You've seen what that trade costs. It costs your sleep, your strength, your fire, and you're not willing to pay that price again. Not for praise, not for presence, not for belonging. Because belonging isn't found in bending. It's found in building, and you're building now. Something unshakable, something that doesn't collapse when misunderstood. Something that doesn't depend on applause to feel valid. You're building rhythm, not speed. You're building presence, not visibility. You're building peace, not perfection. And in doing so, you've become dangerous. to the part of you that used to settle, to the part of you that used to wait, to the part of you that thought silence was weakness. Now you know, silence is strategy, stillness is strength, discipline is devotion, and every time you choose them, you shed another layer of the man you were never meant to be, the passive one, the reactive one, the one who clung to comfort and called it peace. You've buried him with each early morning, with each quiet decision, with each refusal to betray your code, and in his place stands someone different, someone calmer, sharper, cleaner, not perfect, but aligned. Not above the noise, but immune to its pull. That's the Stoic advantage. Not that you don't feel, but that you don't flee. You stay, you breathe, you observe, and you act only when action serves the greater rhythm. And that rhythm, it's yours now, not borrowed, not inherited, earned, with silence, with sweat, with 1,000 small decisions no one will ever see. That's why you don't need to explain. You just keep walking. Because while others sprint in circles, you move with purpose. While others panic, you pause. While others shout, you whisper, and it carries farther than their noise ever will, because real power doesn't demand attention. It draws it. The mirror never lied. It just waited for you to stop pretending. It reflected the version of you who stayed quiet when he should have spoken, who bent when he should have stood, who delayed when the time to act had already passed. But now, the mirror reflects someone else. Not because life got easier, but because you stopped negotiating. You stopped making excuses for your chaos, stopped rehearsing the same apologies for your inconsistency, stopped being available to everything that asked for your time but never respected your presence. And in that refusal, something emerged. Discipline, conviction, stillness. Not the kind you fake in front of others. The kind you feel when the world is asleep and your soul is finally awake. This journey didn't give you new answers. It gave you better questions, like, who are you when there's no one to impress? Who do you become when comfort is no longer an option? What do you protect when silence becomes your closest companion? The Stoics knew that kind of man doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to convince, doesn't need to decorate his actions with noise. He just shows up, every day, every breath, aligned. And alignment is costly. It costs you your former self, the one who needed applause, the one who explained too much, the one who broke his own boundaries in the name of being good. But now, you're not aiming for good. You're aiming for true, precise, silent, unshakable. And that kind of man isn't loud. He's remembered for how he moved when no one was watching, for how he kept his word when no one was listening, for how he held his peace in rooms built on chaos. So if this message left something inside you, don't rush to speak it. Let it sit. Let it steep. Let it shape your next decision, not your next post. Because real change doesn't need witnesses. It needs repetition. You don't owe anyone a breakdown of your healing. You don't owe the world a list of what you've released. You owe yourself one thing only: consistency in the dark. That's where it happens. When the noise fades, when the distractions quiet, when the only voice left is the one you used to ignore. But now you trust. Let that voice lead. Let it guide your schedule, your diet, your speech, your circle, not for a week, not until the fire dies, but until silence becomes home. Because that silence, it's no longer empty. It's full of weight, of direction, of earned respect. The kind that doesn't beg, the kind that builds. And now you know what you once called loneliness was actually your spirit craving space. What you called weakness was sensitivity misdirected. What you called burnout was your soul revolting against a life that lacked purpose. Now, son, you listen differently. You don't hear with reaction, you hear with discernment. You don't speak for noise, you speak for movement. And most importantly, you don't chase clarity anymore. You choose it, because clarity is a decision, a refusal to carry what isn't yours, a devotion to act without asking, a vow to yourself that says, I will not betray my rhythm for their noise. That's how this ends, not with fire, but with focus, not with tears, but with truth, not with a scream. But with silence, the kind that doesn't ask for recognition, but leaves an impression too deep to erase. So now, close the tab, not to escape, but to execute. Walk, not faster, just cleaner. And when the world asks where you've been, let your presence answer.